crime, punishment, and labor. I'm very happy to present our panelists, starting with one of our co-organizers, Lynda Spencer, presenting creating female sleuths and solving crime. There's very much a genre genre panel. Then there's Nedine Moonsamy with Fantastic Justice in South African Crime Thrillers. The title is longer, I will not go into it. And then followed by Duduzile Dlamini, who will be presenting When You Receive, Give, and When You Learn, Teach. And in the end, we'll wrap up with Mmapitso, Sefhemo, who is presenting experiences of women in historically male-dominated careers.
Yes.
So without further ado, let's get into Lynda's presentation.
Thank you, Polo. I don't know, let's just say this organizer decided to have a paper, and I don't think that's a good idea. Running around. So, Polo, just let me know when it's 5 minutes, and I'll jump to the conclusion. My paper is a bit long. So in this paper, I argue that Red Ink by Angela Makolwa and The Lazarus Effect by H.J. Golakai rescript a masculinist genre by offering a female perspective that subverts, disrupts, destabilizes, and problematizes the dominant discourse of crime fiction. These authors are not true to any particular subgenre of crime fiction. Instead, they distort the boundaries by borrowing and amalgamating different subgenres to create a hybridized gendered genre that foregrounds local concerns. For that reason, this paper uses the broad term crime fiction to refer to these narratives because they have crime and criminal acts as their primary concern. Although the popularity of contemporary crime fiction surpasses all other literary genres, crime fiction has also been marginalized within literary studies. Yet female authors of crime fiction have successfully adopted and politicized this strongly gendered genre for feminist purposes throughout the 21st century. Detractors of feminist crime fiction tend to regard it as a complacent acceptance of a patriarchal and social structure that is out of sync with the tenets of feminism. Steve Knight notes the following complaints. Palmer speaks of a discrepancy of values, and Masson sees feminist crime fiction as, at best, the carrier of compromised feminist message, and Babner sees female sleuths as deputy henchmen for patriarchy, and Gisson calls the feminist private eye as Marlowe in drag. Admittedly, crime fiction is a strongly masculine genre that tends to contribute to the periphery place of women in patriarchal social structures. For example, women characters in crime narratives tend to occupy marginal spaces when they do take more central roles as investigators. According to Worthington, they are shown to be deviant from social expectations and norms. More typically, the archetype of victims' refusal to conform and comply with masculine notions of femininity always seems to contribute in some way to their downfall. Women are represented as passive and dependent on men for assistance or protection, or as the dangerous and deceitful femme fatale whose sexuality and economic independence produces gender anxieties that disrupt the patriarchal system. Proponents, on the other hand, advocate for the destabilizing potential of feminist revisions of crime fiction formula, whether these take the form of a refusal of narrative convention or subversion of social norms. However, as Walton and Jones convincingly argue, genre fiction is never simply subversive or essentially conservative. Instead, it serves as a relational, conventional, contradictory location that tends to complicate in practice any simple either or categorization. theorization. Feminist crime fiction is a distinct subgenre that uses an established popular formula to investigate criminal violation, but also the more general offenses in which the patriarchal power structures of contemporary society itself is potentially incriminated. In other words, the plot is explicitly feminist and addresses feminist concerns. For women writers, crime fiction is a political vehicle that articulates female autonomy, women's aspirations towards equal opportunity, and recognition of difference. Female authors use crime fiction to reveal that women can thrive in a male-gendered field as writers of fictional female investigators. Feminist crime fiction typically features a female protagonist who has an intimate connection with family and friends, experiences romantic predicaments, and has the ability to empathize with victims of crime and is physically vulnerable to violence. According to Worthington, feminist crime fiction locates the job of the investigator as one of the previously male-dominated occupations to which women demand equal access and in which they can demonstrate equal efficiency and achieve equal success. The function of the female sleuth is to abide by and systematically disturb the expected continuity between gender and genre. Implicit in the narratives of crime fiction produced by H.J. Golokai and Angela Mukolwa is an overt feminist agenda. Their representation of women in crime fiction undermines this dominant masculinist genre. Both writers embrace crime fiction because as women, they are more vulnerable and experience anxiety in a world that is predominantly patriarchal. The act of writing crime, therefore, allows for women's individual and collective agency. They use the genre to expose the position of women as silent other on whose body the narrative is constructed in dominant discourse and posit alternative positionings for women as subjects producing themselves in or by language. The act of writing crime fiction for these two authors and the two fictional investigating journalists opens up spaces for women writers so that they can exercise language as power. The authors use language or writing to reimagine the historical confining roles available to female characters in crime fiction. Violence in crime fiction is a dominant feature that expresses, explores, and exploits issues that are recently visible within a social and cultural context. So the act of writing enables the women writers to interrogate some of these dilemmas. There was, in the 1980s, there was a sudden proliferation of crime fiction in the United States. Because as female crime writer Marcia Moller observed, there was a collective effort by women to write crime fiction because we wanted to write about the people like us, the people like the women around us. The time was right. By the early 2000s, crime fiction by women was firmly established and highly marketable. As sisters in crime, killjoys or killjoys, both authors and sleuths are able to imagine communities of women, thus underscoring the importance of female solidarities. The authors and the investigative reporters who write about crime inhabit a patriarchal world which constantly tries to pull them back into gendered positions, but writing crime allows them to reveal that women can succeed in a strongly male-gendered literary domain. Although crime writing succeeds in creating a fantasy of feminist agency, it is also riven with contradiction. The act of writing offers potential sites for resistance and reimagining ways in which female subjectivities are produced. As Eileen Julian argues, writing allows women to explore more personal experiences, to allow for desire that goes unarticulated, indeed unvoiced in other forms. The very act of writing for a woman then can be seen as a transgressive, subversive, and empowering act. Furthermore, in Red Ink, Mukolwa argues that the role of the artist is to reveal, to expose some facet of the human soul, whether it's good or bad, express it the best way you know how, and don't give a damn about what people think. Art doesn't kill anyone. Therefore, the following questions could be asked of this violent, masculinized genre when taken up by women. How does women's crime fiction re-script the story of women's lives? How does the female sleuth reveal women's agency? How are the female characters represented as empowered female subjects with voice and agency? What are some of the conflicting pressures for women operating within the genre? Makolwa and Golakai also use crime fiction to envision new career opportunities for women. For example, the female investigator. By using a female investigator, they illustrate that female sleuths become agents for social and political change in a traditionally male field. The writers reflect on the changes in women's roles, their perceptions of themselves, and their relationships with other women that nurture such strong sisterhood. Female sleuths like Red Ink's Lucy Kambule and the Lazarus Effect's V. Johnson prove that they can simultaneously be tough, witty, strongly independent, smart, and vulnerable. By creating black female investigators, Makolwa and Golakai disrupt this dominant discourse. As Margaret Kinsman argues, unlike the male detective, who is detached from society, the female investigator isolates and distances herself not from society, but from what society dictates is a woman's place. Her presence challenges the patriarchal idea that there are places where women dare not venture. From a woman's perspective, the female investigator at the center of the narrative of investigation provides a unique avenue that explores the differences of women's encounters and foregrounds the experiences of children and women who usually are the most underprivileged, marginalized, and vulnerable members of society. Like romance and chick lit, which is my other research interest, crime fiction is formulaic. However, it's important to grapple with with what the genre opens up and what it closes down, instead of wholeheartedly dismissing it as a simple debased form of literature. The growing trend of crime fiction in Africa in general and South Africa in particular reflects a global proliferation of crime thrillers. In the South African context, one could locate the origins of recent crime fiction in Drum magazine of the 1950s, which saw the emergence of the black male short story and crime fiction. Pim Higginson maintains that the African crime novel is an innovation in genre fiction that offers particularly suitable means by which to represent an urban Africa situated within a global network of new and previously unimagined solidarities. Ranka Primero points out that African writers have embraced and adapted detective narratives which perform a variety of aesthetic, social, and cultural functions and offer insights into how authors and readers may understand the present and imagine the future. Crime fiction in Africa is instrumental in representing and transmitting social change and has become a question about how social and political responsibility, and ethics. The emergence of crime fiction by black South African writers, and I know H.J. Golakai is not South African, but when she was writing, she was in South Africa, her publishers were South African, reveals that the writers are appropriating features of the dominant genre to create a localized literary form that responds to and foregrounds local issues. For these writers, the exploration of the transitional moment in the histories of countries is a deep and intimate engagement with place. Told in the third person, Red Ink is the story of Lucy Sibongile Kambule, a young black female ex-journalist who works as one of the main public relations executives in a public relations company in Johannesburg, for her friend Patricia Moabelo. When Lucy unexpectedly receives a phone call from the notorious Napoleon Dingiswayo, a convicted serial rapist and murderer who is serving out his life sentence at Pretoria's maximum security prison CMAX, her life changes drastically. The Joburg butcher, as he has been labeled, approaches Lucy ostensibly with a request to write his biography. He claims that the media portrayed him negatively during and after his trial, and he trusts Lucy enough to reveal his side of the story. Initially, Lucy is cautious, but her lifelong ambition has been to become a writer. Lucy is enticed by the prospect of writing this life story of a notorious serial rapist and killer, and agrees to write Napoleon's story. But Lucy's ambition turns out to be a deadly ambition. She's oblivious to the fact that lurking in the background are Napoleon's younger brother Sifiso and KK Mabote, also known as the sponsor and professor, a highly powered politician and businessman who uses his money and power to manipulate the Dingiswayo brothers to do his dirty work.
No spoilers, Ned.
You haven't read it.
Why? On my to-do list, please, no.
The plot focuses on the ambivalent relationship that develops between Lucy and Napoleon, and on the far-reaching impact and this relationship has on her close friends. Lucy is seduced into a web of manipulation, obsession, and deceit, and unwittingly endangers her friend's life. As corpses mysteriously begin to appear around Lucy, the reader is drawn into the disturbing dark world of sociopathic serial killers, and it becomes Lucy's job to investigate these murders. Like V. Johnson in Golakai's The Lazarus Effect, Lucy is not a professional sleuth. Instead, both protagonists exploit their training and skills as journalists to investigate and or solve particular cases. In Red Ink, Makolwa has written a fictionalized account of the vicious serial rapist and killer Moses Sithole. Between 1994 and 1995, he targeted black women around Attridgeville in Pretoria and Boksburg and Cleveland on the East Rand. By the time he was apprehended, Sithole had raped and murdered approximately 38 women and raped 40. In 1997, he was sentenced to over 2,000 years in Pretoria's CMAX, permeated with suspense and violence and murder. Red Ink uses the Sithole story to expose the perilous nature of the urban environment and foreground the plight of women in the city. In spite of the various political and socio-economic liberties that have opened up for women in post-apartheid South Africa, Red Ink problematizes the notion of freedom by demonstrating that freedom comes with and leads to certain dangers. As women assert their independence and go into the free world, they are constantly exposed to threats of physical violence. Women discover they inhabit a hostile world that continually retaliates against their perceived liberties. And I said, first of all, Shelina said I can't say anything more about the...
No.
So I'm just going to conclude. So I use the word, in conclusion, I use the word in the paper, I use the word sisters in crime or killjoys to refer to the different kinds of sisterhood or communities of women represented in the novels. The first sorority is the writers themselves, Makolwa and Golokai. For these sisters in crime, the act of writing crime narratives is a form of agency that allows women writers to explore some of the roots of violent crime, as well as reflect on the failures of law enforcement officers who have been unsuccessful in the investigation of crime. Secondly, by portraying dynamic female characters, these sisters in crime or killjoys undermine the archetypal roles of women encountered in the extremely masculinized, hard-boiled genre of crime fiction. Lastly, in a patriarchal society that is antagonistic towards women and children, they foreground criminal acts of violence that the most vulnerable are recurrently exposed to. This is useful in rendering visible what is silenced or not taken seriously. The expression sisters in crime also describes the relationship between two of the biological sisters in the Lazarus Effect, which I didn't get to. In Red Ink and the Lazarus Effect, Mapolwa and Golokai rescript feminine subjectivities by creating female sleuths. This is the third way in which I use the term sisters in crime. As investigating journalists, Lucy, V, and Chloe are concerned with investigating crimes. They see themselves representing victims and making their voices audible. Because the concept of women working together tends to threaten patriarchal structures, these female sleuths find ingenious ways of working together within these imagined parameters. Similarly to the writers who subvert a masculine genre, these sleuths destabilize what is considered to be a male profession, in itself an accomplishment because they represent a position that threatens social norms. For these sisters in crime, solving cases is an achievement that demands recognition and opens up opportunities that strengthen female agency and power.
Good to go? Okay, I want to begin by thanking Lynda for very kindly offering to go first. I did ask her to do that off the consideration that Lynda spoke very, I think, cogently about the genre of crime fiction, and I think how authors in the Southern African context have, I think, rewritten or rescripted the genre for feminist aims, and I think to give it some kind of political impetus. And so I think she did a really great job, because everything that she said is definitely applicable to the novels I'm speaking about. However, I'm not going to unpack, I think, the conventions itself with such great detail. So I'm really pleased that she did that. So thank you, Lynda, for offering to go first. Okay, so what I want to offer today is some kind of broader consideration of feminist crime fiction, as we understand it now very well through Lynda's talk. Because I want to talk about something that I'm thinking about as a form of fantastic justice, now currently for lack of a better word. And so we find quite typically in these novels in South Africa that gender-based violence is extensively portrayed. This is again quite typical of crime fiction in South Africa, where it's argued that it works like a kind of diagnostic lens, with a journalistic eye telling us and diagnosing everything that's pretty much wrong in society. And so, as a part of feminist crime fiction, it is important that gender-based violence is explicitly portrayed in these novels. I think what's of interest in relation to this paper is the fact that we also see that in relation to gender-based violence, we see that there are all these judicial lapses of justice in relation to gender-based violence that are equally present. And so we see that writers now are then starting to navigate this impasse in relation to justice and the law through what we can think of as a turn to speculative fiction or the fantastic in the novel. And so then to ask, how valuable is the shift? What does it allow and possibly disallow for? So because addressing gender-based violence, as we know, this has been widely discussed and is a robust conversation in South Africa, that gender-based violence really goes beyond political rhetoric. In South Africa, we know that South African women live in perpetual fear and violence, and fear for their lives, and there's profound despair and hopelessness. These are notable responses to an atmosphere of what we can think of as endemic misogyny. So while this serves as a very candid admission of how South African women are essentially denied what we can think of as very basic human rights, we see that in these novels that I'm going to speak about, the recourse to the supernatural then comes or can be considered as a kind of imaginative narrative technique that helps to navigate this nihilistic impasse of gender-based violence in South Africa. So as you saw, I'm looking at Mermaid Fillet, or Fillet, as some people say, by Ardene, and Three Bodies by Nechama Brodie. Three Bodies is a follow-on from her first book called Knucklebone, and so has the very same protagonists, Ian Jack and Reshma Patel. And so I want to explore how the fantastic is developed as a kind of feminist lexicon that grants visibility to women and engages in what we can then essentially think of as a very creative reworking of justice. So in Three Bodies, we see how this nonchalant disinterest rather than outrage is in fact the status quo in South Africa when it comes to responding to violence against women. So here in this quote, we see that Reshma, who is a police captain, is combing through CCTV footage from Park Station in an attempt to trace the whereabouts of a missing woman. And so she observes how, the average South African is either too fearful to intervene when there's an altercation regarding women, or maybe we're just simply desensitized because this is an all too familiar occurrence. So the novel, I think, is quite interesting in the way it stages an act of what we can think of as this visual surveillance. It's quite self-conscious here. It's marking this irony that though this body is under scrutiny and surveillance by the cameras, by the onlookers, the thing she actually desperately lacks in this moment is, in fact, visibility. In some ways, I think this novel does quite a good job to illustrate how gender-based violence renders women invisible, right? They are almost like spectral figures because women disappear on a daily basis, nobody seems to care. And so as a police captain, it's interesting because Reshma then is, I think, explicitly aware of how her position carries this potential to inflict harm on others, as we see that her fellow police officers are exceptionally dismissive. And so this is the second quote I have here, where her superior chides her for getting distracted, as there are more high-profile cases in Joburg, like cash heists to pursue. And so he tells her that, don't lose it now, because you see a dead woman in a Sprite and develop a conscience. She will still be dead tomorrow, and then you can help her then, advises Sobukwe. So through her very empathetic engagement with female victims, we see that Reshma finds herself increasingly alienated from the male colleagues in the novel. And because they've clearly constructed this hierarchy of crime, right, that dismisses the rights and the livelihoods of women. So here this phrase, don't lose it now, is just a very typical misogynistic dig that women become irrational and emotional and even crazy over very trivial things. And in this case, Sobukwe has identified the trivial thing as a dead woman in a Sprite, right? She's here identified more as an object, anonymous, as opposed to a person. And so I think in the ultimate display of toxicity in this quote, he almost thinks of it as childish, that she would care so much. He chides her for developing a conscience, as if this is actually a silly thing to do in relation to normalized gender-based violence. So Three Bodies certainly highlights how women, find it impossible to continue this institutional life. And so we see that as the law and justice, I think, are shaken up or disentangled within the novel, that we then suddenly cannot see them as mutually interchangeable things in post-apartheid South Africa, especially in relation to gender-based violence. And so it's a rather frightening extent to which institutions turn this blind eye to gender-based violence that is highlighted in the novel, and to the point where I think it could be considered akin to a genocide of sorts. So Reshma, being a police captain, is in an interesting position, right? She's embedded within these heteropatriarchal institutions of justice and the And so then, interestingly, she then goes on to realize that she then has to step outside of the law. She has to work surreptitiously behind Sobukwe's back in order to solve this case, which is just a way of saying she actually has to operate illegally as a police captain. She knows she will get into trouble for using state resources, but it is necessary for her to step outside of the law. This is further conveyed by the fact that we see that there's a private investigative unit that has to be assembled in order to seek resolution of this crime in the novel. So in Three Bodies, we see that it is essentially women who have to take responsibility to protect each other in what can be considered an otherwise hostile environment. So in assembling a private investigative team, we see that the detective, who's Reshma, along with this team, somewhat miraculously are able to solve this case. And so this is what Lynda spoke about as well, this phenomenon of seeing sisters in crime, where women essentially come together and are able to crack the case, so to speak. The members in this novel are the most unlikely collection of people, and they are able to bring down the bad guys. And so in this way, the novel makes this lovely gesture of collective action, as opposed again to the individual hero, which we see in the very masculinist form of crime fiction. And so it's worth noting, I think, that this novel does indeed end with a woman's tea party, instead of the reification of a detective's individual prowess and skill. And so, you know, this is something I think we generally tend to trivialize in society. But I think a space like this does, in fact, have, I think a unique power to effect action against systems of oppression. So Three Bodies, I think, seems to also be making a very pointed response in this regard, showing how women, who outwardly might look like they're having a tea party, may in fact be inciting revolutionary change. And this does extend, I think, into readings of our everyday cultural forms, like, you know, Stockfelds, etc. That women meeting together in spaces may not look like it is radical, but it does indeed perform this work. And so it also ends on what is a seemingly light-hearted note, celebrating women not just as heroines, but if you read more closely into this closing paragraph of the novel, we see that there is this intimation of the mermaid and the figure of the mermaid that shows up in the novel. So they are not just heroines, but they are also super-heroines of their own story. So as we can see from the ending here, these aren't just ordinary women, right? They are superhuman in that they possess an array of magical powers. So Lynda and Eve, two characters in the novel, are mermaids. Mari Joyce is a sangoma. And ironically, this inclusion suggests that if we are seeking justice in response to gender-based violence in South Africa, we actually need to turn to fantasy, to imagine an ending of this kind. So quite typically, I think another feature of South African crime fiction is that you'll find that they tend to end with no resolution. And often it's argued that that happens as a result of writers wanting to reflect what is in fact more real to our lives, right? That in South Africa, we can't rely on the generic expectation of a hero who shows up and solves the crime, because that's just not likely to happen. That's fantastic in itself. And so here, we see that the crime is solved, but somehow, this is an impossible outcome, right? It performs the miraculous feat of solving the crime. And so Brodie shows Reshma stepping outside of the police force, and that she also has, as a writer, has to imaginatively step out of crime fiction and into possibly what we can think of as a form of speculative fiction, and into fantasy in order to perform this resolution of crime fiction. So sadly, somehow, the novel implies that the solution, I think, of gender-based violence is only imaginable through a form of magic, of fantasy, and some idea of a miraculous occurrence. Yet it is possible, I think, to consider how South African authors turn to crime fiction in order to rely on its structures of resolution, possibly as a form of maybe wish fulfillment, that our crimes may also be resolved in the end. And so here, through magic, we see Brodie allows us to access, I think, catharsis even, by seeing these victims saved and granted, I think, what the South African judicial system actually denies them, which is access and the execution of justice. So I think on the other hand, maybe we don't have to think about it in such nihilistic terms, because we can also consider how the presence of the fantastic belies the efficacy of Enlightenment discourse, right? The manner in which I think both Three Bodies and Mermaid, Fillet infuses justice with these elements of the fantastic also poses a challenge to these very rationalist presumptions that are central to our modern judiciary practice. And imagine its reconstitution through more animistic and indigenous modalities. So here in Three Bodies, this institution of the fantastic happens quite clearly through indigenous belief systems. Also because the crime itself is seen as somehow more indigenous in the sense that people believe that these water spirits possess power, and so they're seeking to capture these women. And it's clearly displayed how the crimes themselves, as well as the resolution, is so far outside of the frameworks of the law, of what the law perceives as rational, that someone like Reshma simply struggles to believe that any of it is real. So consequently, we see that her frameworks for reference, as we see in this quote, are so welded to a rational outlook as a detective that her scope eventually becomes far too limited to not only understand the case, but also to solve the case. So despite his skepticism, we see that she has to recruit Mary Joyce Asangoma, because she comes to accept that there are aspects of the case that she simply cannot fathom. She cannot see it in very literal terms because of a limited worldview. Nevertheless, we see the word fairy tales is used here, which is a bit trivializing, right? A way of making Mary Joyce's worldview seem a bit frivolous and inferior. But I think she does reflect the voice of Western empiricism in the sense, like many of us, right? That it's so hard-baked into our understanding of what is real that, even when Reshma at some point in the novel thinks that she's experienced the black magic that's occurring as part of this case, she's experienced it firsthand, she actually doubts her own experience because it doesn't connect to what she understands. I think because it comes across as unreasonable, right, by her Western standards of reason. And so we find that ultimately it's Mary Joyce, it's even Lynda, the water spirits, who become these advocates for indigenous epistemologies, who are more equipped to solve this case. And so then, I did want to talk about how specifically this indigenous epistemology is used to reframe the idea of the language of justice in the novel itself. But I don't think I have time for that. Okay. I don't know how much time I have left to say things about Mermaid, Fillet. 3 minutes. Sure, okay. So basically, this book is also interesting because it uses the same kind of fantastic intervention where we see that there's this figure called the menstruating goddess, and she's the supreme, fantastic figure in the sky that every time a woman is violated in the city of Cape Town, presumably, or beyond, she sends menstrual blood down from the sky as an act of mourning for the violation of women's bodies. And so interestingly enough, there's a kind of, I think this book is far more pessimistic in the execution of how the fantastic can be used as a tool to resolve what we might think of as a lack of judicial execution of justice for women in the country, in that it introduces this element of the fantastic to respond to the concern of gender-based violence and crimes against women. However, at the same time, we see that in deploying the trope, it's very hesitant to perform the same kind of victorious ending that we see in Brodie, right? There isn't like the superheroine saves the day. So I think this text is far more skeptical about a fantastic intervention in that sense. So I think then it's really questioning the kinds of costs that are weighed against representations of women when we do talk about them in fantastic terms. And I think maybe this goes back to the language of like Sylvia Wynter, for example, where this push toward the post-human or the supernatural black body is again a form of disembodiment and dehumanization. When there's still the problem of restoring integrity and humanity to the black girl child, for example, in this novel. So I think that's what this novel is grappling with in weighing out this kind of fantastic intervention that it's making. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
And now for Duduzile.
Hello everyone, my name is Duduzile Dlamini, and what I'll be sharing today, it is theorizing from the epicenter of our agency. So I'll just give a background in terms of what I'm presenting about. Grade 10, I knew that I wanted to be an editor of True Love magazine. I was so sure about it, that's what I want to do. So there was Take a Girl Child to Work Day by Cell C, and I was one of the girls that was selected to go to Media 24. I then met the editor then of Daily Sun, which is Temba Kumar. And I asked him, I want to be in that seat, so what should I do? He said, you should study journalism. I'm like, I think you don't understand what I'm saying. I want to be an editor, I don't want to be a reporter, a journalist. He's like, you need to study journalism. I'm like, okay, that's great, right? And then I go on to the University of Johannesburg in 2012. I do my first year, journalism, love it. And thereafter, I just felt that it was inadequate what I got. And then I said, let me just do my honors. Most probably I'll gain more insight in terms of what I want to do. I do my honors, and when I do my honors, hey, now I fall in love with academia. I'm like, okay. And as I'm falling in love with academia, I get an opportunity to be a tutor at UJ, become a tutor, and after that, I start getting jobs in the academic sector, and I'm saying, so what about being an editor, right? And that didn't happen. I'm still not an editor of True Love magazine, so I'm here. So, so now this paper really is about having the need of a conscious career planning, and it's something that I also just want to impart, to share with, because as I'm saying as well with my study, is that when you receive, give, and also when you learn, teach. So I've never had the best supervision, from honors to master's to PhD, and when I speak to my peers, they're having the greatest time of their lives with their supervisors, and that's why I saw that there is an opportunity for that to happen. It's just that the chances of me not having that experience doesn't mean that it is the universal truth. There are great supervisors out there. So once I started sitting down and doing my research for my MA and also for my PhD, I then said there are people who had the same experiences as me, and they would need this lesson, right? So now that we're in academia, what do we do? So essentially, to succeed in academia, one should possess a PhD qualification or working towards one, and you should work at a public university to teach, research, and be involved in engaged scholarship. So this is a requisite in all 26 universities in South Africa, and this goes across all race, gender, age, class, disability, and personal identity. So literature and statistics from the South African Department of Higher Education reveals that women publish less than men. There are various reasons for this, right? So socio-political and economic reasons are included, but this includes, but not limited to, which is something that I'll engage with in terms of that idea that women lack confidence. Women come into academic spaces with confidence. Something happens to them for them to lack the confidence. So it's something that I'll also just be talking about at the end. So those are some of the reasons that scholars are citing that the reason why women publish less than men. It is that idea that women lack confidence, the lack of mentorship, lack of financial support, family responsibilities, and the skewed gender parity in the workplace. So despite the implementation of the Employment Equity Act and affirmative action, among other international, continental, and institutional treaties, women still lag when it comes to publishing or being published researchers in South Africa. So it is for this reason that my paper is interested in the women who have had their work published to narrate their professional and personal experiences on their journey to authorship. So their reflection and citation selection illustrates personal agency and also professional development and feminist strategy to grow the academy and feminist thought. So this paper will explore the experiences of female researchers who see intersectionality as a strength rather than a challenge in their work. So women across the world entered higher education as student and staff late than their male counterpart. This is largely due to patriarchy, culture, and religious discrimination practices. So when women were finally allowed to enter academia in the beginning, they were allowed to enroll, but they did not graduate or receive certificates. So they were also not included in leadership structures. So yet they were expected to support their male colleagues to flourish in their academic career. Historically, universities were created without a woman in mind. So this is also striking because the first university ever that was established was in Morocco by a woman. And now when this is now happening in the fall, that it's now structured in such a way that women are excluded, it was quite ironic. So scholarship, teaching, pedagogies, institutional culture, and student and staff profile was largely white, male, elite, able-bodied. So this led to state and institutional reform as independence took over. Post-colonial scholarship is largely characterized by neoliberalism, the process of public universities commercializing education. So while post-apartheid higher education was concerned about rectifying socio-political and economic injustices of the past, so this required dismantling apartheid laws and its legacies in all public life, including higher education. Universities had to rethink and reposition themselves within the new democratic dispensation. So the Reconstruction and Development Program, which is the RDP, is a South African policy framework implemented by the ruling party in 1994. So it is a process, it is in the end of one process and the beginning of a new dawn. So from the past now going into the new dawn. So the aim of this policy, or the aim of the RDP, is to meet the basic needs of South Africans, develop human resource, build economy, and democratize the state and society. So how do we then define what an academic is? So according to Plato, an academic is the goddess of wisdom and skills. So it's a high-ranking university educator. It was also reasoned that an academic career requires at least 10 years in the establishment phase before career success can be gauged. So in South Africa, lecturers are often appointed with a master's degree, but will only be promoted to senior lecturer once they have obtained their doctorate. So the position of associate professor is awarded only when the appropriate publication record is achieved. So I thought this was really important for me to present because obviously there's entry career, early career, and also mid-career, and also the people that are in management. So for this presentation, it's for us, people that are still in the early career, in terms of what are some of the things that we can do in the space in order for us to flourish. These are some of the lessons that I wish that I knew, right? So it's teaching myself and also imparting as well to others in terms of what can we do. So the early career phase, I'll just discuss that part. So the early career phase focuses on establishing an academic career. Now that you've accepted that this is where you are, what then are you then going to do going forward? So you now have to establish an academic career. So that means studying, writing, and publishing. So it is attaining the dream phase. So this is when all of this happens. So according to Ismail, Razdi, and Wahat in 2004, women academics who achieved professional level or professional status by the age of 48 are high flyers. But we've seen that there's also other academics who acquire this at a very early age, which is something that I think we can aspire to, because there's the prescribed years that are being implemented, and also there's other people that would get into this position earlier than the age of 48, but at 48 they're considered as high flyers in South Africa. So career success can be both subjective and objective. So subjectively, success is a personal appraisal of how successful an individual feels. It is function of the individual's perception of career progress and may include achieving a high level of competence, obtaining a sense of personal achievement from work, receiving recognition for their work performed, exercising influence at work and enjoying their work, acting with integrity, and successfully balancing home and work life, which is something that we'll also be speaking about, the success thing or juggling home and also your career as a woman, because there are challenges that women face particular than men would. So, all right. So in an objective perspective, academic career success is typically measured by career accomplishments such as salary, number of promotion achieved, position in organization, and the number of research output. So what does entail you being an academic? You need to teach, research, be involved in engaged scholarship, and publish. So let's go to the teaching part. So teaching and learning, that entails you supervising, marking, administrative duties as well. So you also need to stay or keep abreast with the current developments in your field and sustaining excellence in all that you do. So service, or also known as engaged scholarship. So individuals with this career or within this career seek work that improves the life of others. Individuals who value service will be attracted to academic life. So there is a direct link between your research and engaged scholarship. Now that the study is complete, how can you plow back to your community? So those are some of the things that you need to think about as well, because this also comes in handy when it comes to promotion, the engaged scholarship, which is something that is not, it's often dismissed or forgotten by other academics, because one of the things that we usually do is teach, and also usually it's teaching and publishing, and the engaged scholarship is often left out. So it's also important for us to look beyond that as well. So when we do that, it is also just that idea of being in the line of promotion purposes and the aspect of contributing back to the community that you're working with. And community varies. It could be with the community within your research, could be the community in your university that you belong in. So those are some of the things that we need to think about as well. So the autonomy and publishing output are widely regarded as the key to advancement in academia. So publish article, publish books, collaborate with scholars that you intellectually align with. In the spirit of advancing feminist knowledge, women collaborations are imperative. Begin with establishing book clubs, writing retreats, or writing workshops and specialize in your field. Excellence goes without saying, and then we begin to publish. So the primary career management strategy for this group, our group, entry level into academia, would be a singular focus on obtaining our PhD. They often say that being involved in other committees before attaining your PhD could take away your time. So what you need to then do is focus on your PhD, attaining that PhD, writing as much as you can, and then finding mentorship and building a research and publication record. So the politics of citation is also important, that we need to be intentional when we cite. And that politics of citation has a lot to do with supporting feminist labor. I know sometimes when we're writing, we want to get it over and done with. But it's also important for us to be intentional with supporting feminist labor, and also just knowing who are the thought leaders in this discipline that we belong in and do exactly that. So, of course, there are challenges, and also there are alternatives when it comes to academia. So early career women are faced with specific challenges that include adjusting to workplace demands, making a decision about whether to stay in academia, or to stay in academia and get ahead, or move to a support function in the university that does not require a higher academic qualification. And that has a lot to do with being conscious of who you are and the line of job that you're doing. And I mean, some of the most important things that I highlighted is enjoying what you do. Now that you're here, enjoy what you do, advance your career as much as you can. So as we're speaking about these challenges, so the other thing is also deciding when and if you want to have children, because it's quite taxing the academic life, some of the things that you need to do. But also, it's something that I also want to speak about, the politics of a B rating or a baby first. So these are conversations that you then need to have with yourself, and also just in an institutional capacity to say, what kind of support do we have as women who want to have children, who aspire to have children? How can the institution help us? Because I do not think we should be in a position to choose for a B rating or a rating or a child. You can have both simultaneously. So some of the key skills in playing the academic game: self-efficacy. So that is a strong sense of self-belief and your capabilities, opposite to the rhetoric that women have a low self-esteem in academia. And like I said, the low self-esteem comes in some of the experiences that you have. People do come into the space with all the confidence, but it's the rejections that we know of, be it for you to publish, be it for you to get a particular position, or some of the things that are being said to you by a supervisor, some of the things that are being done to you by the academy, and also that dents your self-confidence. But now that idea of self-efficacy is one of the things that we should hold strong to, because it really does help in terms of having a sense of belief in oneself. So again, some of the key skills is collaboration, speaking to as many people as possible, and just knowing that the pie is big enough for all of us to be a part of this particular discipline. And also just finally, when we think about some of the decisions that we are left with, or some of the decisions that we can make, it includes the practice of labor. So it includes staying, leaving, or alternatively starting your own, because it is possible for you to start your own as well. But most importantly, you need to love what you do and do what you love, because it is imperative, and just be in communities that are aligned with what you want to do. And academia is a beautiful space. We just need to foster more spaces like this. This is my first Afems conference, and I love it. Definitely coming back again, and it's one of those things that really motivates you to go further and stay in this particular discipline. I'll pause here.
Thank you. Now to the last paper in our...
Good afternoon. I don't speak many languages. I'm Botswana, so I'm quite familiar with that. My name is Mmapitso Sefhemo. I was supposed to be presenting this paper with Dr. Amos Muyambo, but it's unfortunate. He fell sick on the way. So I traveled all the way from Botswana on my own just to present a paper that he was supposed to help me out. And it's my first Afems. Actually, it's the first time for me to be in such a setup. I'm not in academia, but I'm a woman in construction. Yes. So it's... So it was a bit different for me because you guys speak very fancy English. You know, I've been trying to get this and that. I was like, girl, you need to up your game. Okay, but I'm a student. I just completed my MBA.
Yes, girl.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna have the shortest presentation. Yes, because the lady Duduzile, I think her paper is more related to mine. Yeah, so I'm just gonna try to sum up and not bore you. Okay, the paper goes, experiences of women in male-dominated industry, a case of the mining, construction, and energy industries in Botswana. The reason why I chose this topic or this paper, it's because I'm in construction and it's something that I've experienced or that I know. I'll just give you the background. The mining, construction, and energy industries are the key drivers of the Botswana economy, and the involvement of women in these critical sectors have numerous societal ramifications. That is Botswana, I'd say Botswana, at 80% we are large exporters of diamonds. Diamonds, so we have a lot of construction, we have a lot of mining, we have a lot of gas and oil industries. Okay. So the recent census conducted in 2022, it revealed women make up 60% of the working age population in Botswana and represent about 51% of the adult population. Statistics shows that many women working in this sector. That is 8 to 17% are into mining, then 10% is construction, and lastly, it's just 5% in the oil and gas industry. I mean, if you look around or if you have observed, you'd hardly see a woman maybe driving a truck for petrol, for instance. Yeah. So that's the case in Botswana. But it's not only in Botswana because there's a study which was done about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has just 6.3% of women in the similar industries and mostly are working at low levels. Either you are in this industry and you have a small position, or there's 0% of women in these industries. And then in other countries as well, we have like 2.7% of women in these industries in Czech Republic, about 15% of these women in the similar industries in Singapore. Even though in Botswana there are strong economic incentives for women to enter these male-dominated industries, these women, they keep returning to careers which accommodate their roles as primary caregivers. I'm one of those. I don't know how many times I've drafted a resignation. Yes, because it's impossible. When you are in that industry, it's more like women can't, you know. You can't do it. You can't do it, you know. So that's what we are facing. It's not only in academia, okay? And the big question is why? Why are we having that? Women are still mostly confined to clerical and support roles in these industries, which historically made no provision for women and remained patriarchy in nature even today. We grew up with our grandfathers, our dads going to mines, constructions, while we had our grandmothers staying at home. It has always been like that. The narrative hasn't changed. Just a slight percentage has changed, that you can have a woman as an engineer. Even though you become an engineer as a woman, they still question your qualification. It's more like your qualifications are not quality. I don't know what's with us women, but we can do it. Yeah, we can do it. And then also the embedded gender stereotype that men are the breadwinners, and that women's primary social duties is of a wife and a mother. And then industries are still structured and operate in ways that do not support women's career paths. That is the need to balance work and family obligations. You know, at my workplace, you know, just to get a leave, you tell your supervisor, I have a sick child. You know, it's more like the leave is restricted. They don't have sympathy towards women trying to balance of work and family obligations. It's more like you said you want to work here, so you need to push. And then we have a research done by STEM in 2019. It talks about gender stereotypes. In Botswana, sorry, I can't speak properly, this, it keeps on, in Botswana and many other nations, women were formerly thought to be better for taking care of the home and children than working. The gender stereotype at the workplace. Men are characterized as having positions that convey power, status, and authority in society. Okay. It's challenging for women to survive in this industry when demonstrating the traits often associated, since the culture in this industry is male-dominated and it is perceived as a strongly gendered activity. Since the ideal of a successful manager is built on male attributes, it is believed that women do not make excellent leaders. We also have an issue of traditional responsibilities. That is, family obligations had a significant impact on whether or not the women took the positions. For women than men, the conflict between work and family responsibilities that many construction professionals encounter is more severe. This was a study done by Blosfeld in 2019. This was a further variable in the study to see if married status would affect family. This also offers insight into the long-term effects of balancing family with professions. And then we have an issue of discrimination. These industries are among the oppressors when it comes to the underrepresentation of women in most economic sectors. I remember when I had my first interview, I was interviewed by a construction manager. I'll hold the name for the company. He looked at me and he was like, I'm too small, I'm too little to work in such an industry. Whether I'll be able to pull a cable, that's what he said to me. Sure. It's like he had already analyzed in an interview that this one, I cannot hire him. So that's the discrimination again, which is in these industries. And also the legislation. Botswana's pre-colonial Tswana society was founded off a rigidly regulated division of labor based on gender differentiation. The historical legacy of patriarchy shaped important informal and formal human connections with a notable impact at the workplace. But then again in Botswana we have Mine, Quarries and Machinery Act, which supports women that no project should take place without at least like 3-4% of women in that project. So we have the law on our side, but we still reside. It's not as easy as it seems. So can I please conclude? Yes. Can I please conclude? Okay, in conclusion, the organizational culture in these industries continue to discourage women from participating, which has a negative impact on retention rates. This research shows that prejudice still exists in these industries. In order to keep more women in these industries, this would be by removing misconceptions and barriers, as well as by implementing programs such as open relationships, working practices, equal opportunity policies, and mentorships. This would help mining, construction, and energy firms restructure in a way that supports the inclusion of women in these areas regardless of gender. So I leave it to you guys. Maybe you can come up with a solution to assist some of us. Please don't ask me questions because I don't have answers to my questions. Thank you so much. And
thank you to all our speakers. I think you can see
Thinks about genre, and if one thinks very conventionally about genre, then post Amitav Ghosh, speculative fiction is the genre to deal with sort of eco-critical issues. Romance is a female genre, and crime fiction is a male genre. So why, on what basis, or how do you think it comes to be that a sister Killjoy chooses to write romance fiction as a feminist intervention, or alternatively crime fiction as a feminist intervention?
Good, can we take that question and go to the second question?
Yes, my comment or question is to Duduzile, as I'm also one of the people in early careers, and I think sitting here listening to the contribution is also just making me a little bit unsettled, because we sit in these spaces as people who've just entered, and we try all these things. We do the gymnastics, the clowning, the performing of juggling balls, and every single time somebody says, no, stop it, no, you're doing too much, not now, and we are stuck in this wheel, and because we become, sorry to say, puppets of the professors, because the professors are still advancing their lives, but we need to do the dirty work that they don't want to do. So publishing takes time because professors don't want to teach anymore, so now I must teach, and I want to be HOD, I get told, no, sorry, Sissy, focus on your life, because, it's not as simple and as straightforward as doing all of this, because we are doing all of it, but it's still doors closed every single time because we must bow to the professors. I'm not looking at them. Who become gatekeepers of young black female progression, right? Whether it's intentional or not is a different debate. And it's, I just want to say it's not as easy as saying do it. It's a to-do list. We're trying the to-do list. We're juggling. We change. We shape-shift. It's just not working. Yeah.
Thank you. So can I just, before I take one more hand, but can I ask for the first question to be answered by two speakers? And I know you don't want questions, so you can take the chance. You'll take Duduzile. Yes. Can I have the third question, please?
Yeah, thank you. It's actually going on from what PJ was saying. That when we talk about what you have to do as a young black woman in the academy to get ahead, or in other industries to get ahead, the focus then tends to problematize the young black woman as being slightly inadequate, and then you are permanently on a frickin' wheel running to be 100 times better than anybody else and still not get noticed. And we have to recognize the problem is not young black women, it's the institution and the institutional culture. And that is a much bigger issue for us to address. And it needs allies, and it needs multi-pronged attacks, and it needs policies, not just policies to change, but policies to be chucked out and replaced with different ways of doing things. Different kinds of recognitions of what is knowledge and what is success. And so, you know, as much as I'm saying great thinking and wonderful, you know, to bring these kinds of papers, I don't think it gets us ahead. What gets us ahead is, okay, these are the issues. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 17 people have written about the problems of young black women in the academy. Now let's work together. So, and I mean, this is a good space for doing this kind of work. You know, how do we ally? How do we work together to change the institutional culture into something that recognizes where we are going and what we need to get there? And it's not the older white male professors.
I'll take a second. I saw your hand. Will be a second round. But can I please I'd love to hear Lynda and Nadine's response to the question around genre. And then so that I think you've got some responding.
Okay, thanks, Paula, and thanks for making it me and Nadine's problem. Because she can do the speculating, I'll do the romance, chick lit, and crime fiction. I can see you, Fiona, the cameraman is right here, but I can see I'm addressing you. I think for me, for female authors taking on these genres, whether it's romance, whether it's chick lit, whether it's crime fiction, I think there is something subversive about that. Well, not in romance and chick lit, because that's really a feminine genre. But by writing, and it's not just writing, one of the things I say to my students, it's not just about the writers and what they're writing about and how they're trying, especially in the African context, trying to localize that and trying to speak to issues about that. But it's also about why is there this interest? So let's take romance and chick lit, and two things, and crime fiction. These are genres that people tend to marginalize because they're not too literary, they're not too aesthetic, they don't do, they're not J.M. Coetzee, or they're not Abdul Razak Ghana to win Nobel Prizes. What, Charlene? Okay, yeah, so they're not that. But then one of the things that these female authors are doing is they're recognizing that there is an audience. Why is there an audience for romance? Why is Mills and Bourne or chick lit or crime fiction, which is generic, because that's what genre it does, which are generic. How many of you have read Mills and Bournes? Some of you are denying. Why is it that a Mills and Bourne, which you know when you open that page, it's going to end in happily ever after? Why is it that years after, Mills and Bourne is maybe 110 years old, why do they still continue? So what is it? Because it's the story. Girl meets boy, there's going to be some fiction, conflict, whatever, they don't understand it. Happily ever after. Why is it that if you look at chick lit, and so why is it that the genre sells? Why do these female authors, for those two, why are they taking that up as a way of communicating? And with the crime fiction, in this case, it's a different way entry for these women to say, okay, what is it that we're doing? And it was interesting because I haven't read the text that Nedine was talking about, but even in my text, it's about what is happening to the female body. So if you look at Angela McCall, her first book was Red Ink, which is kind of fictionalized because Moses Sithole did call her. She went to CMAX. She was that interviewer until it became too creepy in there, and she decided, I'm not going to go back there because something might. So she then takes that and fictionalizes that to write and talk about women in this way. But the other novel that she wrote, which I haven't talked about, is Black Widow Society, and which somehow, when we were talking about the menstrual goddess, reminded me, because in Black Widow Society, what she does there is also very subversive, very destabilizing, where she takes the image of, the Black Widow, you all know the Black Widow, the spider, but she takes it as these women, a group of women, again, sisters in crime, female solidarity, these women who have been cheated on, not really cheated on, but who've been abused by their husbands. And they have this, they hire a hitman who has just come out of jail to go and kill their husbands, and then they collect the insurance and they're set for life. So it's a different way, it's not a fantastical resolution, but it's a different way in which these women can then, in a way, benefit from the, not benefit, I mean benefit materially from something, and punish or kill the person who has had this gender-based violence. So I think what women are doing is, for me, it's a very feminist stance that they're taking when, whether it's my Polo or Gola Kai, when they talk about, when they use genre, whether it's chick lit or romance or crime fiction.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation to say that genres are gendered differently. But my sense of it, if you think about what is the feminist intervention then in relation to genre, I mean, even if you look at romance, right, maybe it's more feminine than, or feminized as a genre rather than feminist. So perhaps if we think about genre as this series again of categorization, right, like gender, and that link is something that Lynda made between genre and gender, and that linking itself is heteropatriarchal, it's colonial. So maybe then the feminist intervention is always then to hybridize the genre, right? That's why chick lit is far more feminist than like romance, for example, because it is a hybrid Bildungsroman / romance, or an anti-romance even. Yeah, and then maybe that blurring is maybe a decolonial, anti-gender, anti-genre move then, in a formalistic way of speaking. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. I see there will be another round. Let's just let Duduzile respond, and then we'll do the next 3 questions.
Okay, thanks for that engagement. So essentially what I was trying or attempting to do with this presentation is the tools that you need before we fight the policy, before we fight the institutional culture, right? There is obviously that idea that higher education wants to fix the woman and not fix the institution. And you see that with all these interventions of the programs that are being held for women when it comes to women in leadership, when it comes to women who want to be professors. There's all of those things, but it doesn't really speak to the institutional culture, which is something that I'm going to speak about as well. But essentially, just to answer you, before you even go to the hiring committee, the questions that they'll be asking you: do you have a PhD? Are you published? Are you involved in engaged scholarship? And if your answer is yes, then you take it from there. But if the answer is no to all of that, so what exactly are you then going to say to that? Because it's the tools that you need. I know a male colleague at the University of the Free State who applied for promotion. And when he applied for promotion, they said to him, because institutions vary when it comes to promotion criteria, they said to him, you're publishing, you need to publish, I don't know, I think 2 more articles for you to be in line with this promotion and also be involved in engaged scholarship. So he was rejected, and also they told him the reasons for that. And he went back to say, okay, I get it. And then he went on to do exactly what they wanted and more. And he went back to the panel and said, I have these. And he had the promotion. So that's what I'm saying, that it's important to have the tools, because if we're just talking and we're not doing the work, then it becomes an issue again where we feel like we're doing too much and no one's recognizing it. But are you doing the right thing, right, in terms of the promotion or for you to belong there? Because also there's that idea that when we're in conferences, that's exactly when we need to start doing the work. Immediately after this conference, we get the feedback. Let's go back to the drawing board and write. Let's go back to the drawing board and do the work and collaborate. So in that way, it is the tools. I understand the institution. Before you even deal with the institution, have the tools that when you get there, you say, this is my receipt, this is what I have, and what are your criteria, and am I meeting the criteria? What can I do to meet the criteria? They let you know, and then you do exactly that. So just also again, that question of saying, or not even the question, but the feedback that we got that it's just all talks. It's not just talks. We have these conversations and we do the work, because talking without action is not transformative in any way. So obviously there are deaf institutions, I agree, absolutely. But now the first thing is the tool. Once we have the tools, then we need to dismantle this toxic institutional culture, just in academia or any other space. But the tools are really, really important. That's what I'm saying, especially for us when we enter the career.
I think, yes, there are 3 more questions, and I can see a 4th hand, but I'm very sorry, I'm not so sure I'm going to take it. And there's something we need to think about in terms of a framing of what excellence is, and what, because there's something that can be problematized in many, many ways, in ways in which we don't have time to enter right now in this room. Hand 1, Shamin, and then Pumla? Or would you like, who had hands up? 1, 2, no? 2? Oh, there are 3. Oh, you did, yes, it was 3, sorry. Yeah, I had. About the order, sorry. It was 1, 2, yeah. All right, speed talking.
So my questions are both to Prof. Lynda and Nedine. Thanks for your beautiful presentation. But I'm interested in how the authors you've discussed construct these women characters at a literary level to ensure that they do not reinforce or perpetuate the heteropatriarchal violence or language of killing, of overpowering others. Like, I'm interested in how the authors go beyond just inserting female characters as investigators, but at a writing level, think about what it means to pen a crime, like, in an innovative way. And I'll make an example, like, if you watch crime thrillers, like in motion picture, like you get a lead investigator who's a woman, who's very smart, but then there's this patriarchal characterization of women. She must suffer from acute madness that always hinders her from like getting the crime solved, for her to be doubted, you know, because she's mad, maybe anything's wrong. Because as a woman, you can't just be smart and normal. You have to be weird, you have to be sick, yeah. So I'm just interested in how the authors think about that.
So for the crime fiction people and also for Duduzile, I am going to make it my mission to read these writers because and they've been on my list, but Wits makes it almost impossible for me to read a book actually. Forget even like my, but I'm a huge crime fiction person. And, I've also been very interested in the kinds of feminist characters created by men in crime fiction. So someone like Keigo Higashino, a Japanese author, he has the most amazing woman in his book. And so, he's so popular, he doesn't even care about being translated in English. But so you have to wait for a long period for his works to be translated. But really, his stuff is absolutely outstanding. Just like how in Nordic fiction, everybody says this is the next Stieg Larsson. There really has not been the next Stieg Larsson. I mean, the Millennium Trilogy, the Salander character that he created, it wasn't just that character, but it was the relationship between all the women characters and how they supported each other that is completely missed and has been destroyed by the movies themselves. So they've taken like a feminist work written by a dude and actually turned it into a dude novel, right? And so that for me is quite interesting like the ways in which the crime fiction has allowed for actual like feminist characters and very intelligent feminist characters to come across. Even as you have someone like Joe Nesbo, when he doesn't know what to deal with his woman characters, they always end up in a coma or dead or on research leave, something, but they just somehow disappear from the plot lines. And then for me, there's a paper in there in somebody being put into a coma, right, in order for the male characters to continue doing their maleness. So that's just the commentary just on and I think somewhere in there is how sometimes I get disillusioned with woman detective shows. Like the women are, as you said, there's all these tropes, but also they have to be so stupid at times. Like they're so stupid and so superficial, like the one with Gabrielle Union and Jessica Alba. That should have been a match made in heaven. But it's so utterly superficial. It's as if Cagney and Lacey didn't happen in the 80s. And Cagney and Lacey was really amazing as a feminist show. So from that trajectory to back to where now it's all about who. I mean, come on, if you're a cop on duty and you're running in high heels, really, like really, couldn't get through yesterday with my little boots. So that's there's just a commentary. So Duduzile, I mean, I think the thing for me was the excellence thing. Is because once you get into these positions, you're so tired that excellence plummets. But also the ways in which excellence is a white phantom game around individual meritocracy, right? That Hurtado speaks about. The ways in which the boundaries of excellence are always moved. The markers are always constantly being moved, which is when you get so tired that you actually then, I don't know when last I produced anything excellent. I don't know when last I produced something that I can say, wow, I'm super proud of. There's things that I say probably till the day that I die, that this is my building block for another article that I'm going to do. That is going to be great. But then I decide, okay, well, these are the times that I live in, and I don't have to be excellent. I can just do. I can put one foot in front of the other. I can type one word after the other. And maybe I won't be remembered for any of this, but also being remembered is also something like this burden that we carry with us, you know. And I drive down Beyers Nordia and I think about the sacrifices he made, and I think about how nobody cares who Beyers Nordia is. And so maybe also those kinds of things about being remembered and making a difference and all of that, as opposed to, okay, today I just want to write something I really, really, really like about feminist crime fiction authors, and that's all I'm going to do today. I'm not fighting. But I also think about then, okay, how does that individualism and attending to oneself, how do we translate that into collective action within the systems? Because the systems are not going to break themselves by themselves, right? So how do we take the markers that we've been spotted against and move that into collective action? And I think for me, there are pockets at South African universities, but in terms of like serious collective action, I've just found that missing, especially in my discipline, where individualism is so grafted all the time.
I know.
Wow. Okay. Charlene said a mouthful. So I have a question to Lynda and Nedine, and I wonder, and then I have a tiny comment, but really tiny, not like Charlene tiny, comment to Duduzile. I mean, it's not that I don't have anything to say to Mmapitso, but she did ask not to be asked things, so I'm just gonna not ask you things in that spirit, not because I don't have things to. So Lynda and Nedine, I wonder about whether you think that there's a connection. I haven't read all the books, and I like Polo, but I'm very scared of reading ink. But I think you may have finally convinced me to read it, because maybe it's not the kind of scary that I thought it was, which is why I've been avoiding it. So I wonder, both of you, please, if there's a sense in which, for you, thinking about feminist crime fiction, whether feminist, so thinking about feminist crime fiction in the way that you've spoken about, but also thinking about some of the ways in which we're starting to see in kind of the filmic, like in the last, I don't know, maybe it's older, but more pronounced, in the last 2 to 3 years, the COVID onwards, a proliferation of kind of criminal or sleuth type or vengeful black women characters in the South African moment. So this is the question. It's a very messy question because I don't know what the connections are. And this is what I'm asking you to help me make sense of. So do you think that there's a way in which the crime fiction genre in this moment in South Africa allows, in addition to what you're saying about being able to process the nightmare of violence against women, of gender-based violence, also is a genre that enables, or that these feminist crime fiction writers are choosing as one of the spaces that is able to hold feminist rage. Because it strikes me as particular that at the same moment that we're seeing, you know, Nechama, Magi, so we're seeing it in very kind of specific ways in the South African and Namibian landscapes, right? That suddenly there's a lot of, you know, of crime fiction by feminists, by unapologetically feminist women. But at the same time that we're starting to see, well, not the same time, slightly later, but it seems to be piggybacking on that, we're starting to see almost permission in the filmic genre of a scripting or a performance of women's rage, maybe feminist rage, maybe women's rage. And I'm just wondering if you think that there's anything in the I mean, if that makes any kind of sense to you. But also, I just want to say to both of you that listening, you know, I'm trying to think through a few films and series currently that work through this, and I'm thinking maybe it's feminist rage, maybe it's not. But I just wish, honestly, like I wish I could just sit, like lock Lynda and Nedine in a room and just like listen to you talk and take me through all the things I need to know about crime fiction properly in order to be able to make this sense of this thing that I've been struggling for the last 18 months to make sense of, this kind of body, this kind of series that where you have, which, yeah. So do you think there's something about women's rage or whatever that this, or you know, that there's something about this genre that right now that allows or do you really just think it's about, it's not rage, it's something else. Maybe it is something, yeah. And then I'm going to assume that made sense. Yeah. About as much sense to you as it does in my head, and it makes no sense in my head, which is why I want to lock you two in a room and have you teach me everything about crime, how to think about crime fiction in literally critical terms. And then Duduzile, you know, I think Polo and Charlene are absolutely spot on in terms of the need, the importance of tending to, you know, the myth of meritocracy, right? And this kind of script that is given. But I'm also starting to wonder increasingly about the kinds of conversations that we're having in the academy as different generations of women academics, right? And the kinds of conversations, I mean, I know that intergenerational is a buzzword in the country right now, right? But I wonder, because I'm hearing the kind of frustration in response to your presentation, not necessarily in your presentation, in response to your presentation that echoes frustrations I've heard, you know, that we're hearing often from younger scholars. And interestingly, some of which are very similar to frustrations that many of us who are older experienced at our, you know, as we entered the academy, although there were significantly fewer of us. And I'm wondering about what your thoughts are about, given your kind of plotting of how we can begin to think about an intervention at an individual, but also at a collective that makes these big shifts. What your thoughts are about how to have that kind of intergenerational conversation, right? Because it feels to me often like first of all, there's a handful, really, of feminist professors in the South African Academy who are all overburdened by invisible work, right? Like, we're all worn down, we're all sick, people get sick all the time, right? But of course, the languaging of that is very different, right? So, I mean, very little of it, I mean, what are you going to say? Like, oh my God, I'm a powerful professor, but I'm sick. Like, I mean, that's like, what is that? That's crazy, right? Like I don't, also so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about, because I do think that there needs to be this conversation, because I do think that there are narratives that I think could be more productively framed if that conversation was happening. Or just to give you a quick example, I know I said one, sorry, Polo. Yes. Yes, Polo. So for example, I think about, in a part of and this is not a special story, it's an example of a story that I hear from other colleagues often. That there's often a disconnect between, so there are these older women scholars who think, okay, this is what I would have appreciated. This is what we would have appreciated. So we grow up and we try to create a version of this thing. But we don't speak about it, right? And also clearly a lot of older women professors in the South African Academy seem to kind of create a very different impression of what the experience of being a woman professor is versus, what we make it look easy. But then that space that is created, project, whatever, department that is created from this labor in providing, okay, this is what I would have provided, this is the kind of support that I would have required, is then very often then read as, well, you're just creating your own fiefdoms, right? Or, so in a variety of ways, like this kind of, in terms of making resources and networks and positions accessible, so it's a problem that often strikes me as one of legibility. And so this is why I'm just explaining this one example very badly, very quickly, as a way of trying to explain why I'm asking you this question about what do you think, because it's not like the work is not being done, but if there's such misunderstanding of what the work is, what is the conversation we are not having, right? Because I'm honestly quite tired of seeing all of the Black women of my generation get sick, right? At the same time that you listen to a narrative that is complete about the powerlessness, that is completely out of step with what the experience of that position, is. And of course, we know that institutional culture does this inversion of making Black women look like they're in the position of white men in the academy, which is crazy, right? But anyway, so that's why I'm asking, what do you think about what kinds of, because I think you very kind of concretely plotted some other things. So perhaps unfairly, I'm now saying, how do you think we should be having this conversation in a way that actually does the work that we're all trying to do, but we think we're not trying to do?
Everybody, it's like so much to discuss. Yeah. What you just said. And I've just been told that it's 2 o'clock and you all only have half an hour for lunch. So can I please suggest